Welcome to the History Nerds Now podcast. I'm your head nerd, Brendan. Thank you so much for being here. Today, Laurie Gwen Shapiro, The Aviator and the Showman. This is going to be one of the books of the year for me, people. Like, just hands down. It's the story of Amelia Earhart and her husband, George Putnam, and just their dynamic, how it all happened, how Amelia went from such great heights to completely disappearing. What I absolutely love about this is Laurie gives you the whole story. The good stuff, the bad stuff, the really bad stuff, and puts it in front of you as a reader and lets you really decide what you think about these people. It's not a hit job. It's not hero worship. It's everything perfect in between that lets you as the reader look at the evidence and make your own decisions. It was such a great time talking to Laurie. She's a great conversation. So how about I just shut up? Let's get to Laurie. And here we are with author Laurie Gwen Shapiro, The Aviator and the Showman, Amelia Earhart, George Putnam, and the Marriage That Made an American Icon. Laurie, thank you so much for coming on.
I'm so excited. If there's a history nerd listening, you are my people.
I loved your previous book, The Stowaway. But I have to think with The Stowaway, it was a great story. A couple people that other people might recognize, but this is Amelia Earhart, one of the most famous women in American history. Was there any nerves about taking on this subject, or were you like, no, let's do it?
No, absolutely. I was terrified. I felt like a charlatan for the first 6 months. What I originally wanted to do was a story that's in the middle of the book about these kid explorers that Amelia Earhart's husband promoted at great risk. And one of them was a rival to the Stowaway in Antarctica. And he gave a kid a book contract to go to Antarctica. Now, I went to Antarctica for my research. It's not safe where he was going. And I was thinking, what kind of guy would send a kid in 1928 to Antarctica for a book contract? And then I realized that Amelia Earhart, there's a cameo in The Stowaway where she's flying over the ship where the people are about to sail out Admiral Byrd's boat, the city of New York, and the stowaways, there were actually 3 stowaways at the beginning of the book, are hiding, and Amelia Earhart is over them. And I started to really read about it. I realized, oh my God, that's his mistress. And I just thought to myself, well, that wasn't in my scholastic book growing up. You know, that it's absolutely true. I have it on my bookshelf. I live in the apartment I grew up in, and my first biography has my child's handwriting in it, and it's about Amelia Earhart, and I bought it from the Scholastic Book Club. And it was, of course, very watered down, and I really wanted to write a book that was just absolutely true. And I'm a journalist by training, and that was my MO, just find the truth, wherever it led me. And that's where I began. And my agent was talking to me and said, you know what, the more you talk about Amelia Earhart, the more I want to know about who she is. Do you think you could expand the book? And that's how I got to it, with a sort of a conversation with my agent. And I thought, yeah. And then I looked, and there hadn't really been a book about Amelia Earhart for over 20 years that was not about, you know, some sort of cockamamie idea of how she died, which is, that's another topic of conversation. But for me, the way I sold this book, or rather the way my agent sold the book, is the mystery is not how Amelia Earhart died, which we can get into why I don't think it's that much of a mystery, but the mystery is how she lived. And I started this book with questions. Who was she really? Was she truly married to George Palmer Putnam, who is the other person, the showman of The Aviator and the Showman? Was she a good pilot? Was she a secret Nazi like Charles Lindbergh? What was her sexuality? I mean, like, all sorts of questions. I didn't care what I found. I wouldn't care or judge her. I just wanted to find the truth.
Now, I have to jump back, because we were about to jump to Amelia, but you brought up something right away that I think any listener is going to say, what do you mean child explorers? So, the showman, George Putnam, we'll call him GP just to keep it simple, he just did that once, right? It was just that one time. He wouldn't consistently put minors in danger and drop them into seriously scary situations, right? That was just a one-off thing.
Absolutely not. He started with his own son. It was sort of an experiment. I mean, whatever knocks that you get against George Putnam, and there are plenty of knocks to be found as you read this book, he was sort of a marketing genius. He had developed these instant books with ghostwriters. I mean, do you think that Amelia Earhart could write a book in 6 weeks, never having had a book before? I mean, nobody was writing their own books. And that was a Putnam innovation. But he decided one day to see if his son, who wasn't doing that well in school, could get a book, by him. And he started with his son, David Binney Putnam, when he was 11 years old, and he was off on a trip to the Galapagos. It was a major bestseller for Putnam. If you look on the bestseller charts of that year, 1924, I believe, it was in the top 4 for adult readers as well. So he then started to go nuts with this idea of, first it was just boys, and he would send the kids to Siberia. There were kids walking from South America to North America. There were Boy Scouts going to Africa, and they were shooting lions. And they all had to sign away their rights. And the parents, you have to understand, would love the idea that, there's a Putnam book coming out about their kid. They had control of the money. The kids had very little agency. And then as you get from the end of the Jazz Age into the Great Depression, which as many of the listeners here would know, starts in October of 1929, and there's no money to be had, and there's a book deal for your kid, sure, I'll send him to Africa, no problem. What's really fascinating to me, and I bring these young ladies back into my book, is that when Amelia comes on the scene, and Amelia and George connect in 1928, even if they get married in 1930, they're 31 actually, there is a push from Amelia for girls to get the chance to go on these adventures. And there's some girl explorers. There's a 10-year-old girl floating down the Colorado River. I mean, I thought this was a great book unto itself. Don't get too disappointed if you're listening, because the whole story is within a larger book about Amelia Earhart and George Palmer Putnam. So you'll get to hear that story. And one of the things that was really fascinating for me is, because this story takes place in the Jazz Age, most everybody that would be in the book was dead. And I was working off of archives, both written archives and oral archives that were recorded. But there was the children of these children were alive, because they were in the Jazz Age in the Great Depression, 10 to 15 years old, and they had children, and they knew a lot, and they had never been interviewed. So that was a very rich archival resource for me. What was it like, what were the parent stories of being published as a kid? And a lot of them hated it. They didn't want to do it, and their parents were saying, this is money. Are you kidding? You have to do this. And they were put in tremendous danger. What I was trying to do, if you think ahead, is establish very early on that Amelia took a lot of unnecessary risks, and that George Palmer Putnam was in the business of risk. So when you get to the end, no spoilers here, Amelia Earhart disappears. You know that this is the team that has taken tremendous risk, and they've always come out on the right side with luck. And maybe in 1937 was like the last time that they were going to have that lucky streak.
Now, the good thing is, Laurie, of course, is that we no longer exploit children like that. It's not like there are YouTube channels that are parents exploiting their children. So clearly this stopped back in the 30s. There's so much, because I think you do a great job with Amelia's childhood and everything, but at the same time, there's too much to get into. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. When Amelia and GP first meet, I'm trying to think of a fancier metaphor here, but she is effectively her famous flight. She's recruited like a Backstreet Boy. It's like, hey, find me the person that fits this. And they're like, we got somebody for you. Am I being just childish?
No, I have actually spoken about this to my editors. Amelia was really the first reality show. And let's go back on that. A lot of people love Amelia Earhart. I actually love her. I'm happy to say she was not a secret Nazi. But people think of this as a Midwest story. To me, as a native New Yorker, maybe this is part of my bias, but I feel like the Amelia Earhart that we know was conceived in Midtown Manhattan in an office in Putnam Publishing. And the reason for this is that George Putnam was not in charge of his publishing firm, which a lot of people get wrong. He had an uncle from the Civil War days who was 900 years old, who was there was like 5 nephews. It was like a game of secession. Who's going to take over. But he was making a name for himself with these adventure books. He was the person that published all the scary, terrifying events that like made great books. And most notably, he used all of his network to get the scoop on Charles Lindbergh, how to get to him. And he got him a publishing contract. And Charles Lindbergh did a very quick book called We, and We was what Charles Lindbergh referred to in quotes as him and the Spirit of St. Louis. So, and it was, of course, one of the best-selling books of the 1920s. You can imagine, 1927, there's no one more famous in the world than Lindbergh. So what is left? There's no shock. There are other men that go across. They all get ticker tape parades for a little while, but people get bored, just like we get bored on YouTube. And what was next was the opportunity for a woman to cross the Atlantic. And a lot of women wanted to do this that were really professionally trained and able to do it. And some people were just trying to be a passenger. And there was a woman named Mabel Bowl who wanted to do it. She had a lot of money. She came up out of poverty and she wore a lot of diamonds. She married a rich guy who died, and she just rubbed people the wrong way. I think she's great, personally, I got to tell you. But, you know, back in the day, there was a woman who was very, very wealthy, who was very offended by her. And she thought, well, if Lindbergh was increasing relations with Paris, I want someone to increase relations with London. And so she thought she would fly across. This was Amy Phipps' guest, who was the Phipps steel heiress, and that's where that money was coming from. And her children were appalled. They were like, "You're going to die. Mom, stop." And so they came up with a solution that she would sponsor someone, a young feminist woman, to go across. Not necessarily to fly, to actually just be a passenger. And just being a passenger was enough to make you famous if you were the first woman. And as my book goes into, there were 7 women that tried before Amelia Earhart. Most of them died. So this was getting bigger and bigger in the news. Who's going to make it across? And when she is brought on, Mabel Bowl is also going across at the same time. And there's like this big race again of the all-American versus this classless lady who's dripping in diamonds. And, you know, the press made a field day out of it. But that is what the impetus for Amelia Earhart going across was a book deal for Putnam. Now, Amelia Earhart, it's very important to know at this time, is 31 years old, which doesn't sound very old to me, to be honest. But back then, that was sort of a use-by date, I guess. And she was a feminist, a really long-time feminist, and she wanted desperately to have her life count. She had been doing some hobby flying in the 1920s, you know, just really like weekend flying, a little bit of stunt flying, but she couldn't really get ahead because there was not a lot of opportunities for women. You know, men could get sponsorships, women could hardly get them, and they didn't have the hours of World War I, which a lot of the male pilots had at that time. And so she found an entrance into social work eventually. And that was a way that women could actually rise in prominence. And she was the flying social worker. So that she got a little bit of prominence in Boston. And when Putnam was putting feelers out, his friend in Boston, Hilton Rayleigh, who was a big PR guy and his secret buddy, they were up to no good all the time. They were like, let's do this together. And he's like, I heard about this flying social worker. She's all American.
Which what really sent me down a rabbit hole kind of around this part of the book is you just start talking about some of the other women flyers. Because at this point, like you said, Amelia doesn't have a lot of experience. She's not an exceptional flyer, but it's not like she is the only woman out there. Like, I spent a good amount of time looking up Elinor Smith.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, I want a book about her. Can you write a book about her at some point? Please do that.
I want to write a book. Here's a secret about Elinor Smith. She was very, very young in 1928. And remember, Amelia Earhart is 31. And she was flying since she was a kid because her dad was an Irish vaudeville promoter and knew Jimmy Walker, who a lot of people will know was New York's boozy mayor in the jazz age, the epitome of the jazz age. And she got her license at 16. She was the youngest pilot licensed in America. And she had already been flying since she was 8. So by the time she's like doing real stuff, she's a better pilot than Amelia Earhart. And she's younger. And Putnam, became at first Amelia's promoter. Later on, he's a lover and then her husband. But he is very threatened by Elinor Smith. But remember, one thing is that she's very, very young. So one of my great resources for this book is, you're not going to believe this, but Elinor Smith's daughter is still alive, her oldest daughter, who lives in New York City, where I happen to live. And so we met at a diner with all sorts of archives and stories. But I also fact-checked Elinor's tale, which was said over and over again, way before archives and Googling, with very consistent details that she was bullied by George Putnam. She was tricked into thinking he was going to promote her. He was just trying to silence her. And she was a feisty New Yorker, which I love, because I'm a feisty New Yorker. I don't know if there's any out there listening. But she was not going to take any BS from him. And he got very angry. He had a trigger temper, famously so. Not a lot of people loved Putnam unless you were important to him, and then he treated you like royalty. Or maybe his kids he treated very well. But he went into a rage and he tried to crush her career. And there were aviation reporters that backed this up, and they were terrified of him because Putnam was palsy with people who were important, like the editor-in-chief of the New York Times, which is how we got the Charles Lindbergh contract to begin with over every other publisher in New York. He had the Times slip a telegram to Lindbergh in Paris. So this is really interesting. It's a grown man really bullying a 16, 17-year-old girl who's an incredible pilot. I will say, and you can Google this if you don't believe me, that Elinor Smith was named the greatest woman pilot in 1930, and she did get the Wheaties box. Which is, I love that. At least she got the Wheaties box.
I mean, I did not find the Wheaties box in my own research. I'm going to go back and look. Well, I think it's another inflection point where you see, the impetus of this relationship is that Amelia is not an exceptional pilot, but she's perfect for what GP is trying to do, where you have Elinor, and you talk about this in the book. Elinor is the real deal. Like, male pilots who think women shouldn't be flying recognize that she's a fantastic pilot, even at her age.
Oh, she is an incredible pilot. She was actually, one of the most dramatic scenes is in Delaware, where she's trying to set records on her own without being married to a promoter. She's a kid. And she convinces Giuseppe Balanca, who the Balanca planes are for the Lindbergh level, like nobody touches my plane kind of guy. But he invited Elinor to come test pilot one of his new planes, maybe doing a record in it, because women were good for publicity. But he didn't want someone who was going to wreck his plane giving him publicity. That's the wrong kind of publicity. And Amelia Earhart's husband, George Putnam, and at this point they're not married, they're just lovers. He sends Amelia with a pilot. He's pretending that she's flying it, but she doesn't have that experience yet, with a check for $25,000 to get that plane away from Elinor and to buy the plane until Amelia Earhart can be good enough to fly it. And Balanca's knows his test pilots are like, Amelia can't fly. Elinor's actually in the plane and she's shocked. Like, it's not that Amelia Earhart couldn't fly. She couldn't fly this very sophisticated plane. She was doing a lot of lecturing. I really like Amelia Earhart. Let me stress this again, but she is not getting pilot time. And anyone who's a pilot will tell you, and I'm not one, but I have a lot of friends now that are pilots, you need time. You need practice. It's just like writing. You just don't get to be a good writer. You have years of experience. And that incident was pretty remarkable. One thing it led me to understand was that there was, soon after that plane was not given to Amelia, a notice that Amelia got a transport license, number 4 in America. She's this great pilot, but she didn't have the experience to have a transport license. And suddenly the license got lost in the mail. And if you actually look at the licenses now, and I've gone through all the research for many years on this, there is no license that precedes 1930. Amelia Earhart faked her license, not saying it, her husband's doing the dirty. So in certain times, there's this good cop, bad cop act going on. But Amelia's not actually hated by anyone. I mean, that's something that was really interesting to me.
I mean, that was going to be my thing is anything here that we talk about, and listen, we're going to dig into Amelia, like there's some negative things here. But throughout the book, you pointed out, even people were like, she can't fly this plane. It's too sophisticated for her. She's going to crash it. Nobody really had they had plenty of bad words to say about GP, but everyone who came in contact with her came away liking her. And very often the exact opposite for GP, right?
Right. And as a biographer, I think one of the mistakes that a lot of people make is sometimes you work with the estate, and the estates want to protect a certain type of persona. They don't necessarily want you to know what the truth is. And I think some of the issues of previous biographies is they might be working with Putnam family. Nobody wants to know that, their grandfather was a bully and trying to lock down women's careers. And sometimes the other alternative is another type of biography where everything that Amelia does is perfect. The truth to me is much more interesting. And I think one thing that I came across is that Amelia had two driving things about her MO, if you would like. First of all, she was very much a feminist. In the end of the Jazz Age, it became unfashionable to say you were a feminist, but she was a charter member of feminism, like way before she met Putnam. She refused to use his last name. She was a Lucy Stoner. She wrote a letter to the New York Times saying, please don't use the name Putnam. That doesn't mean that she didn't love him. She just wanted her own identity. That's what she had grown up wanting as a young girl. She had a scrapbook of feminists that she admired. She really pushed for women and feminism at all times. The other thing is she was pushing for aviation. She saw purpose in her life. She was really lost. She had 28 careers before she landed on pilot. And now she had a reason to exist. She could really help push aviation forward. And by this, I mean that by talking about it, she encouraged women and children to go on planes, saying it was safer than car rides. And with that, women would also let their husbands go on planes. And the whole aviation industry was born in great part because of Amelia Earhart constantly talking about how safe aviation was, and aviation was the wave of the future. And if you're a modern person, you'll go on a plane. And she was even hired by Charles Lindbergh's startup to be this voice of reason. Women, why are you afraid of flying? That's something that we need to know. She always was pushing for aviation. Now, a lot of stuff that is given to Amelia as, that she gets credit for is not true. But nobody's going to want to hear it. But if you're listening to this, I know you're a truth lover. She said, people said, oh, she did her own fashion line. Well, of course, yeah, she did launch a fashion line, but did she actually design it? I mean, do you think that Kim Kardashian is sitting there designing her clothes? She is in many ways the first influencer. And Putnam is a genius about this. He gets secretly, I found the name of the lady, she's in my book, gets people to design the clothes and get press for her. He's just trying to keep her in the headlines. And one of the things that she's also given credit for is being an aviation editor at Cosmopolitan magazine. She was a terrible writer. She was a good poet. She was an okay poet, to be honest. I found letters of the ghostwriters. All of her books were ghostwritten. She was a great reader. She happened to love history, and she happened to love biography. And what she wanted to do, she would dispatch her ideas to ghostwriters who would then turn it into columns while she was flying, or turn it into books. She did want to really settle down at the end of her life and really learn to write. And the thing about writing, and I'm talking to anyone who wants to be a writer out there, and I know this to be true, you need to actually have time to write. This book took 5 years to research and write. And I've spoken to other people that I admire, like Candace Millard, who, to my great amazement, blurbed my book. She's one of my heroes. And she said she doesn't normally trust a history book that takes less than 4 years to come out. You have to do research. You don't want to parrot anyone else's book because people get things wrong. You always have to go back to the original sources. You got to look for new sources, and you have to triangulate the truth.
Well, what I love about the book, too, is you talk about all of this evidence. But at the same time, if you're doing a book like this right, you're not going to have all the answers. Because one of the questions that I think you lay out and you see it, but we're never going to be able to answer it, I really feel like people loved Amelia and hated GP. But I also think that was their kind of plan. Amelia, you're always the one that everybody loves. You got to be in front of the cameras and all that stuff. And GP is just known, I'm going to be the bad guy. I'm going to protect you in the background. And there's evidence to that, but we don't know that they necessarily said that. But it looks like, there's a few things that you could attribute to Amelia that don't look great, but they fall on GP.
Well, that's where these tapes came in really handy. Like some of her pilot friends, one of the most incredible audio tapes I listened to was Louise Thaden, who was one of her best friends, an amazing pilot who won the 1929 Women's Air Derby, which a lot of people call the Powder Puff Derby. And she was talking off record in 1970 about what Amelia wanted. And there's other archives where she was going to get married to someone else and she was going to have a different life. And she got a taste before the Great Depression in 1929 in October. She became famous in 1928, in June of 28. When she was the passenger. From June of 28 to October of 29, she had $1 million in the jazz age. And she had fur coats and she got free cars and she had it good. And, hey, who are we to judge that? Would you
get that back?
Opportunity? Yeah. Sure. And Putnam asked her to marry her. He was obsessed with her. She was the it girl. He had a wife that was 10 years older, who had been a big source of his income. She was the heiress to the Crayola crayon. That's another story. But the thing is, they did love each other tremendously, but marriages can grow stale. And here was this it woman. And he really did. I do think Putnam really loved Amelia Earhart. I think that Amelia was very fond of Putnam.
Well, I have to bring up something that I'm sorry. Amelia cannot be defended from this one. Poor Samuel Chapman. So, for those who don't know, Samuel Chapman is her longtime boyfriend / kind of fiance / the poor guy was on the hook for a really long time.
7 years.
Amelia kept him there, and she kind of kept hope alive, and when hope was very, very dead. And then she's starting to get with GP, and Samuel is still kind of around. And to his credit, he had probably the story of the century. He probably could have put a lot of it out there, and he was a guy who just took it on the chin and then just quietly walked away. I felt for Samuel Chapman more than anyone else in this book. He broke my heart.
I think his politics also aligned with Amelia's. We won't get into that too much. But I think also he was a very big reader. I think George Putnam was very verbal and very literate, but I don't think he was a great reader. I think he was a skimmer. He got what he needed.
Those people.
I think that Sam Chapman was an engineer who was, going to Tufts. He met her out in California when he was subletting a room from her warring parents who were going through a divorce. And Amelia dropped out of Columbia to see if she could help them and and that's where she learned how to fly. And he was subletting one of the rooms, and that's how they met. And the mom must have been like, oh, he's from Marblehead, which is outside of Boston, very yachty, and this is a good match. Guess what happens? You're going to have to look in the book because, Brendan, you haven't seen the photos yet. There's 60 unseen photos that are with captions that are coming out in this book. She is also being chased at the same time as Sam Chapman in California by a very wealthy gentleman who's in his 70s, who has a fortune. And he wanted to marry Amelia Earhart. And so when people give me the story that she was just with Sam Chapman, I'm like, not so fast. I mean, I think I'm the first one to break the news that Amelia Earhart had a sugar daddy in the 1920s, the famous Yellow Peril, which is quite a racist term now, but that's what they called her car that she went across. That wasn't something she saved up for, which is always the story. She was given this car by a millionaire who wanted to marry her. And one of the audio tapes that I found is Amelia's sister talking, her sister, so this is a pretty good source, saying that she wanted to marry this guy. And her parents, were Victorian parents, and said, I don't care if you're 21 years old, you're not marrying a 72-year-old guy. And that is in the time that she's supposedly engaged to Sam Chapman. And there is an announcement that I found in the Los Angeles Times, and I found an announcement of Amelia engaged to Sam Chapman. When she moves back, her parents do break up. There was no success there. The two girls go to Boston. This is how Amelia gets to Boston to become a social worker. leaving from LA. And again, she's originally from Kansas, but she lived all over the country. Sam follows her. He's from Massachusetts. He's trying to work out in California. He follows her to Boston. They are actually dating while she's dating Putnam because he's still married, remember? He's trying to shut him down. There's other lovers of Amelia Earhart that are revealed in this book. Many people who know the Amelia Earhart story know that a gentleman named Harry Manning was a first navigator before Fred Noonan on her original round the world trip. A lot of people don't know that was also a lover of hers. And Putnam tried to shut that down too. And how do I know about this? I have audio tape from Manning's wife that I listened to. So this is where looking at archives can give you a very different story than the story that we've been fed. And, I do understand. I mean, Amelia Earhart is also a heroine to many, many children around the world. She was my heroine when I was younger. And, this isn't a clean story. But history isn't clean. And I say in the book that you can have two thoughts at the same time. Amelia Earhart was a good person. I'm really, really, really happy to say that to anyone listening. But she wasn't a perfect person. I mean, the book literally starts with an affair that's going on. I mean, that's okay. This was the jazz age. To George Putnam's credit, his wife was also having an affair at the same time. I mean, this is a very messy narrative. I hope at the same time that I've put it in a way that is readable by people, that I believe in just telling the story, doing deep, deep, deep research, getting your facts right. I'm not just making stories up. I have in my book at the end all my source notes, which people are able to look at if you don't believe what I'm saying. The audio tapes, to my delight, have now been made public through the Smithsonian. You can listen to them from your computer now, which I couldn't when I was researching this book. And you can listen to some of the stuff and think, wait, that can't be true. And then you're like, oh, maybe it is true. And also some of my more unusual archives that I found, I list where I saw them if anyone wants to check up on it. And also, at the same time, I realized that more archives can be made available after I'm done with this book, and the story can change again. And I said in my book that I was very happy to be able to interview the other biographers that are still living that I took seriously. I don't take all the biographers that seriously. But the ones that I thought did a really good job. I mean, I don't agree with everything that they came up with, but I have to remember that they were doing their research before the internet. They didn't have newspapers.com. You don't judge what was said. And there could be letters that come out that she was having a relationship with someone else that I don't know about. Letters are the gold standard in history. I didn't find anything that was in fact, I don't know how many people saw the movie. Amelia, which came out, I think 2009, was based on some books. I don't buy that Jean Vidal, who was Gore Vidal's father and was probably Amelia's best friend as a guy friend, was her lover. I think she had a crush on him. And I found archives that no one had looked at before from Gore Vidal, who many of you who are readers will know is an incredible novelist and was a terrific writer. But he was also inventive. We were talking about some of my friend Malachi McCourt before we started this podcast. I'm like, who would love to just tweak the story a little bit. But his story changes over and over and over again. And eventually, before he dies, and he's big with the bottle, that's public record, he's just making up stories to biographers about Amelia Earhart's love affair with his father. The original archives show that they were friends.
All right, so that book does not have your seal of approval on that. Well, it's funny, hearing you talk about the sources, I think about this as, I'll read a lot of books about a shipwreck that very few people know about, but for authors like you who take on a big name like this, you have to make yourself bulletproof because people are so emotionally invested in some of these stories that they'll come after you and say, oh, she's crazy. She doesn't know what she's writing about. There's an unnamed organization, I'm not going to name them, that has their own theory. And they went after, as we're taping this podcast, I had an excerpt of my book in the New Yorker. I went through 7 days of fact checking with 2 fact checkers. If you cough in a piece for the New Yorker, you have to prove that there was a cough. It's not for the weak. I've never been fact checked on the level that I was in New York, but I made it through with flying colors. I'm very proud of my research. So when somebody says I don't have the goods, I'm like, yeah, well,
I made it through fact-checking here. I also had to go through fact-checking with Viking, who's a very reputable publisher. They're not about to put out, lies. That's not good for them either. I also am a journalist. I write for the New York Times. I write for the New Yorker. This is my first in-print piece, but I've written for them before online. I've done a lot for Slate and the Daily Beast. And I teach journalism. I'm a professor of journalism at NYU in the master's program. I teach students how to fact check. And I say to them, if you make things up, it's going to bite you. It's going to embarrass your editors and you're not going to work again. So it's very important to me to practice what I preach. I'm not just making up things about Amelia Earhart. I think I'm going to sell books, which I think has been in a bunch of other books. I don't go past the line of what I can't prove.
Well, especially when you say, proving something, I think about Amelia because it does sound like we are kind of hammering on her a little bit, but I think when you read the whole book, you get a completely different feel because the most important aspect of her, we've kind of touched on it, is, and you said it, when she was the passenger on that famous trip, she didn't fly, and when she got back, she was pissed. Because she's like, I'm being treated like I did something that I didn't do.
Absolutely.
And she, for everything she did, whatever you want to say about her, for everything she did, she wanted to live up to what people thought she was. And it seemed to be like that in every aspect of her life that, that's what all humans can do is to try and be as good as we possibly can. And she was that.
And also she felt a tremendous loyalty to Putnam, who, spoiler, he did not get to take over Putnam and pushed out of his family company, partly because he was doing crazy things, which I'm so excited for you all to read in the book. And there's photos of these things. He faked kidnappings. He pretended that Putnam Books was going to get blown up by fascists. I mean, this is not a soft guy, is what I'm trying to tell you. There's a little Machiavellian energy going on. And Amelia stuck with him. All of his authors stayed with Putnam, and she stayed with him, and partly because when she had a lot of money, and she did lose a lot of money after the stock market crash, she got swindled out of money as well. She had a loyalty to him. And I do think she loved him. I'm going to put that on record. I do really. Maybe the relationship changes, but I'm in a long-term marriage with a man too, and I met him when I'm 21, and I'm in my 50s, and there's good years and there's bad years. That's what marriage looks like. And I do think she genuinely loved him. I think he was really on her nerves on the last year, which you'll get to in the book. But I do think that one of the great characters of my book, at least, is the Great Depression, which is a sort of a tie-in to my last book, The Stowaway, which was set between 28 and 32 when people cared about things like ships going to Antarctica and ticker tape parades, and they come back. The Great Depression has already hit, and people really don't care that much anymore. And that's why my Stowaway got forgotten. But what is really hard for people to understand is how desperate people were in the Great Depression. I had older parents who had been kids during the Great Depression. They would tell me the stories of my grandmother taking an axe on the Lower East Side, chopping wood from old buildings so they could have heat. But people who were celebrities and businessmen lost their money. And Putnam did have his house from his ex-wife. She had a lot of money because of Crayola and divorced him and let him keep the house. But he was what they call house rich, cash poor, I think is the expression. Putnam had no money. Amelia Earhart, again, was swindled out of money, which is a minor moment in the book, but interesting. And she lost all her money. And this was a partnership as well as a marriage. And that was quite documented, I think, in this book.
There's so much to go over here, Laurie. There's just so much. There's so much in the book. I loved it all so much, but it would be a 6-hour podcast to go over everything I want to go. So I'm just going to have to fast forward. I don't like it, but we're going to do it.
Okay.
Amelia's final flight.
Mm-hmm.
I think it goes right off of what you said. There's a bit of a desperation there. You got to stay in the public eye. You got to bring that money in.
Right.
So clearly what happened is aliens, right? It was aliens took Amelia.
There's an episode of Star Trek, I don't know if anyone has seen it, that Amelia Earhart is in, from, I think it was Deep Space Nine, I believe. And there were scientists that studied Americans' perception of Amelia Earhart about 5 years after that. And 8% of Americans believe that Amelia Earhart was taken by aliens. And 2 scientific studies back that up. But I do think that that final flight is a tragic flight because she did a lot of amazing things. I mean, she did fly across the Atlantic by herself in 1932.
I mean, they almost made it. It wasn't like it was the first part. They almost made it.
But one of the problems was Amelia's, it's like she had a crash. They tried to do the flight the first way around, and that's why Manning left, because he's like, oh my God, she messed up. She didn't have enough training on the Electra, which is a very, very different plane. It's 1937. What she flew in 1928 compared to 1937, it's like night and day. You know, you have to keep your skills up. There's a lot of radio communication going on with the Coast Guard. She refused to learn Morse code. Fred Noonan, who was a phenomenal navigator, also had a phenomenal drinking problem. He was kicked out of Pan Am, even though they thought he was the best navigator. He relied on what is called celestial navigation, which is using star signs. He was great at it. But they were fighting. I have on tape that he was completely drunk 2 days before the trip. I think he was sober on the flight, but she took him to a small town in New Guinea to look at art, Aboriginal art, to keep him busy, make sure he was sober on the plane. He was calling her the B word on tape, like people were saying he was drunk. I mean, so this was not a happy relationship going on in the plane. Who knows? But what I do know is that if they did have Harry Manning on this flight, they wouldn't have had any of the problems that they had. There were some equipment problems that might have been the Coast Guard's fault as well. But mainly not knowing radio codes, not understanding that Howland Island is the size of Central Park, very difficult for anyone to hit. I mean, the other pilots were warning her, who were much more experienced than her. They were saying it was safer for her to wait again until the same time the next year and do Hawaii to Howland first. Howland is where she disappeared around, I think. She had dysentery, which is a fancy word for diarrhea. It's that with my New York accent, diarrhea. And sorry, New Yorkers. She was sick for weeks. She's fighting with Noonan. She's tired. This is an exhausting flight. So to have that leg last is not, but she thinks, let's just get away with it. Even in New Guinea, they were trying to get a man named Harry Balfour to get on the plane. They were worried about it because of Noonan. The people that ran the airlines, that were gold mining airlines in New Guinea said, no, we can't let Balfour go. He's our radio guy. So she went on that flight in a very dangerous situation with maximum gas. And there's very clear tapes as well that, actually, I shouldn't give all of this away because I want someone to write.
Let me do this for you, Laurie, because this is the real question I want answered about Amelia's disappearance.
Sure.
Your book, you take the reader through the paces of how it was a bad idea, how mistakes compounded on mistakes, and you come to a general conclusion about what happened.
I do.
However, after reading this book, loving this book, trusting everything in this book, if they announced a 2-hour documentary saying that they think they found Amelia's plane somewhere else in the Pacific, I'd watch that damn thing. I know it's not true. I don't know. But can you explain that to me?
Last year, there was a big situation where people thought they found the plane. There's a lot of people trying to find the plane. I think certain companies have more of a track record than others. I follow Nauticus, if anyone wants to, they had something to do with finding the Titanic. I was talking to scientists when they announced that. I love the Romeo brothers. I think they're delightful. I think one of them felt that, he told me personally, he had a feeling that he was the guy to find Amelia Earhart. That's not a reason that you're finding Amelia Earhart. I had other people telling me from the other team, it's a rock. Of course, if you read the headlines, it was a rock. It wasn't a plane. And they were loving the press for the rivals. Why do you think they were loving the press for the rivals? Because it put Amelia Earhart in the headlines, and it helped with funding on their search and their expeditions. Amelia Earhart is good for fundraising. There's a lot of false expeditions that use Amelia Earhart as a way to get money for the people. They might be a nonprofit and they take a cut or whatever it is. There's all sorts of people and groups. Really interesting to me is that I do think that Amelia's plane will be found. I didn't think that starting the book. And I do think that it will be a very interesting moment if it's found. I do think I know approximately where it is, but that's my conjecture. But that's based on 5 years. That's based on 5 years of interviews with hundreds and hundreds of people. A lot of interviews that I did with experts were off record because people are afraid of those that go after those that don't like their theory, which I just had happen to me. I just had an email that I had all my facts wrong when I just went through the fact checkers of the New Yorker. I mean, because that's scary, but it's like, it's not true.
There's something about it that even like I completely trust where you end up. And if they announce something, like, again, a 90-minute documentary, and they're like, we think we found her plane here, I'd be like, I know you did not. You definitely did not. But I'm still going to watch it. There's a draw to this woman still to this day that even if we're like, I know this is a wild goose chase, this is like a Bigfoot situation, but I'm still going to watch it. And that's kind of her power to this day, right?
Putnam knew it too. And even the 99s, the women pilots were not going to have Amelia Earhart as their first president. The first president was supposed to be her good friend, Louise Thaden. She says that on tape as well. And I've seen it. I've been to Oklahoma and went through the archives of the 99s as well. I spent several days in Oklahoma City. She was never going to be the president, but even the women knew that Amelia got publicity. And they said, you know what, Louise, do you mind not being president? Let's make Amelia Earhart president because she has the audience through Putnam. And they had missions that they wanted feminism pushed forward. They wanted protection for women pilots. And Amelia Earhart was going to get more attention than Louise Thaden, even though she was the better pilot and had just won the Women's Air Derby easily.
Oh, man. So, Laurie, we're going to do some time traveling right now.
Okay.
I'm going to send you back in time. You can talk to one person from your book. It can't be Amelia or GP. That's too easy. You get to spend 1 hour with somebody from your book that you haven't been able to speak to. Who's it going to be?
Elinor Smith, hands down.
Perfect. Yes, that's what I wanted you to say.
I think that she's one of the surprise heroines and a big character. She's not a main character, but I think that she was speaking the truth. And one of the things that I came across writing this book where people were saying that she was a liar. And the more I fact-checked her, she was always telling the truth about she didn't have the transport license. I checked her with very, very old aviation editors from the New York Times that are in their 90s and said, oh, Elinor always told the truth. She lived a long time. And a lot of people that are alive now, aviation experts, knew her. She didn't make anything up. I never found anything that was made up in anything that she said. And she said a story consistently. And, there's an expression, believe women. I mean, people say, oh, she was jealous of Amelia. I'm like, no, she was bullied. Imagine if your daughter was 16 years old and people were bullying your daughter, like a 50-year-old man. I mean, I guess in that time, 40-year-old man. That's pretty horrifying. It's traumatizing. I have had that happen. We've all had that horrifying boss, haven't we? You can't diagnose someone that you've never met, but, many of the psychiatrists that I spoke to said he would probably be a narcissist. I mean, at this point, with a trigger temper, and delightful and charming and lovely to the people that he loves, like his children, to people that are in power, like Charles Lindbergh. That's what a lot of narcissistic people do. But Amelia Earhart wasn't that narcissistic. I got to tell you that. I think she just really wanted to fly. She really wanted to push women forward. And you don't have to give her a false fashion line or false, her who's who has, she's an aviation editor. She's a book writer. She does it all. No, she didn't do it all. But she did fly. She was incredibly brave. And there were many, many women that became pilots because of Amelia Earhart. And there's women astronauts that entered space because of Amelia Earhart. And I got to tell you something. The irony of all this is that you don't get women going to the moon without George Palmer Putnam. Amelia Earhart was not going to do this by herself. So there's a bad taste on a lot of what he's doing. But Amelia Earhart wasn't going to be a heroine. And that's the title. The subtitle is Amelia Earhart, George Putnam, and the Marriage That Made an American Icon. And it was this marriage that made the iconic version of Amelia Earhart that we know. She was always her own person, but the Amelia Earhart, the public personality, is a collaboration between Amelia Earhart and George Putnam.
All right, changing subjects real quick, because you've already actually answered a little bit of this question, but I love asking wonderful authors, are you getting time to read your own, history books and nonfiction? And who are your favorites? Or is there any of your friends that you want to plug that have books coming out, which I can answer a little bit for you. Emily Nussbaum, one of your very good friends, friend of the pod, been on for Q the Sun. Michelle Young is the one that connected us directly, The Art Spy that just came out. Candace Millard, my number one as well. I already talk about her too much. I'm not going to do that. Anybody else you want to add to that list?
I'm so excited that my book is excerpted in the New Yorker because that's really what I read. I read that kind of narrative history where it feels like a story, but it's all true. I guess my current heroes, so Candace, of course, amazing. And her footnotes are like its own experience, by the way. If you've never footnotes. David Gran, who has mentored me, he actually gave me the most extraordinary blurb, which I can't imagine didn't help the book getting more attention. And then Patrick Radden Keefe, who did Say Nothing, which was just made into a series. I'm actually going to be in discussion with Patrick Radden Keefe at the National Arts Club in New York on September 30th, and it's free and open to the public if anyone's listening. And I love that kind of storytelling. Stacy Schiff is a great writer. I love people that can make history come alive. I do read a lot of academic books, but that's not my particular cup of tea for what I relax with. And I do love novels because sometimes you want to laugh or go into a different world. And I think reading novels has been scientifically proven to make you more empathetic, which I think we all need in this world. And also, you should need to know that I used to be a novelist when I was younger. I had a bit late career shift. And so that's where I learned how to write dialogue and have a little bit of comedy in nonfiction. And I think that in my book is that I'm not afraid to use dialogue. A lot of writers are afraid to. So, and I really thank writers that have taught me a lot, like Jennifer Egan is a tremendous novelist who's won the Pulitzer Prize. I was very fortunate to have her as a teacher. I will say at all times, I think about my mentor when I was in high school at Stuyvesant High School in New York. And my first English teacher who really changed my life was a gentleman named Frank McCourt, who of course wrote Angela's Ashes and won the Pulitzer Prize after retirement. And he is in my head at all times. I was very fortunate. I published a book when I was young called The Unexpected Salami, which Anthony Bourdain reviewed in the Times. You can fact check that. And Frank McCourt blurbed it. It was like right after the Pulitzer Prize. And I was the first student of his to publish a book. And I teach journalism, and I have young students, and I love working with them. And they're all starting to get clips, and that joy of teaching is very much part of my writing experience. I will say that if you had to put a gun to my head, I would say if I would probably be reading the David Gran or Patrick Radden Keefe book.
Okay, I didn't physically put a gun to your head, but the question did.
No guns on this podcast.
Well, Laurie, the last question is always, hey, if somebody who doesn't like history, why should they read your book? But before I hit record, one of the things that you asked was, who is this podcast for? And I think that's an even better way to say it, which is, you know what, we're looking to get these types of books to people who don't realize that they love history just yet. So one of those people's in front of you right now, they're like, oh, Laurie, I don't really read history. History is boring. Why should I read The Aviator and The Showman? What would you say? Because
I think that if you're interested in the truth and not a sort of whitewashed narrative of history, I think my book is going to give it to you for the first time. And there's hundreds of books about Amelia Earhart. And I've never seen a lot of the stuff that I'm putting in this book for the first time. I'm not just rewriting what's come before me. I've done years of research. And I really chased after archives to give readers something new. And as I've told people again and again, to me, the mystery of Amelia Earhart is not how she died. The mystery is how she lived. Who was she? If you really want to know who Amelia Earhart was, I don't think that we'll ever know, the exact truth. We can't get inside someone's head, but I think this book is as close as it's come so far.
I agree, Laurie. It's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on and talk about it.
Wonderful. It was so great to be on this podcast. I love that you have a love of history. That's my kind of people.
And that's it for this episode. Laurie, thank you so much for coming on. The Aviator and The Showman. Like I said, people, one of the books of the year. Trust me. Get it. Read it. You're going to love it. In the meantime, hit us up Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Don't forget the YouTube channel. Until next time, nerds, stay cool.
History